Bellevue, and today I want to discuss a Western movie from 1971 called Hannie Caulder. Now, if you aren't familiar with this movie, you're probably not alone, and that's unfortunate because it's actually a pretty good one. The movie was produced by a British studio, and it did quite well in the UK, but its theatrical release in the United States was just mediocre. But in the age of DVDs, it's become something of a cult classic. Be that as it may, the reason this movie is of interest to this channel, besides the fact that when it came out I was a 16-year-old boy and Raquel Welch, well, if you were a 16 boy in the 1970s, 60s and 70s, I don't have to say any more than the words Raquel Welch. But besides Raquel Welch, this movie features some of the most unusual firearms to be featured in a Western movie ever. And I think that makes it worthy of a look. Now, I'm going to get to the guns in a minute. I'm going to give you a brief recap of the movie's plot because I know a lot of you probably have not seen it. So if all you want to do is see the guns, then just fast forward. You do have that magic button on your computer until you see a gun, and there you go. Okay, so no need to complain about too much yakking. All right, so let's talk about the movie just for a minute. In the movie, Raquel Welch plays Hannie Caulder, and she was the dutiful wife of a stagecoach station manager in the Southwest, and her husband is brutally murdered by a trio of robbers. And they rape her, badly beat her, and then attempt to burn her up in her own home on their way out the door. But she survives, and she's looking for revenge. And in a nutshell, that's the plot. Of course, Raquel Welch plays Hannie Caulder, but as far as performances in the film, Robert Culp plays the gunfighter who rescues her, and he is excellent in an understated way. But for me, what makes the picture are the three bad guys. Now, they're the Clemens brothers, and they, earlier in the movie, robbed a bank and were fleeing from Mexican rurales, or federales in this case probably, when they came across the Caulder stagecoach station and did their nefarious deeds. And the Clemens brothers are played by Strother Martin, Ernest Borgnine, and Jack Elam. And their performances are outstanding. Every single one of them. To me, they absolutely make the movie. But Ernest Borgnine's performance, I think, stands out as the very best in the movie. While you can't call him a handsome man, he is one of the most fantastic actors to ever grace Hollywood. And he does very well in this picture. Okay, now let's talk about guns. Robert Culp plays bounty hunter Thomas Luther Price. And he is a master gunfighter in this movie, of course. What else are you going to get out of Hollywood, right? But Culp plays the role very well in his understated way, and he is armed with some very interesting sidearms. Now, in the movie, Culp wears two guns. One is carried in a strong side drop loop, typical Buscadero style holster. And the other one is carried cross-draw just about at his belt buckle. And the typical Buscadero holster is like the last thing typical about Culp's firearms, because the gun that he has on his strong side is a gun that I doubt if we've ever seen in a Western before. It's a British-made Adams double-action revolver. And this gun was originally made in the 1850s. This particular one probably is a Beaumont Adams that allows it to be fired both in double and single action. The original Adams could only be fired in double action. It's a very typical looking British gun. It's been converted from percussion to fire cartridges for the convenience of the armorers, but it absolutely has a unique look. These guns were converted to fire cartridges later in the period. I can't tell if this gun is a Mark I or a Mark II, but it appears to have had the ejector removed. So either it was a cartridge firing gun that had the ejector removed, or it's a cap and ball gun that was armorer converted to handle cartridges. No, I'm not sure which. But either way, it really looks pretty neat. Culp's second gun is a gun that we've seen before, and if you've watched this channel for any length of time, you have already seen this gun. It's a Smith and Wesson new model number 3. And it's the same gun that Culp carried in the 1950s TV series, Trackdown. And in that series, he got this gun because he did not want his character to carry the typical Colt single-action army. He wanted something different. And Culp's a gun guy. I mean, he is actually knowledgeable about firearms. He liked shooting. He's passed away now. So what he did is he contacted Smith and Wesson. And he said, hey, can you fix me up with an appropriate 19th century gun that I could use in a TV series? And Smith & Wesson, happy for the publicity, since Colt was generally soaking up all the press from the TV westerns, provided him with an original new model number 3 in .44 Russian, which I assume they had in the vault somewhere. But they made some modifications to it. They welded on an extended hammer spur. And I believe they also ground off the rear sight. And that made the gun fannable. And it made it much better for a fast draw from the holster, which of course is what you needed if you were a 1950s TV star. So apparently they just gifted this gun to Culp because he still had it 15 years later when he did Hannie Caulder. And you can clearly see the extended hammer spurs, particularly in the scene where Raquel Welch is trying to shoot it for the first time. Another good look at the Smith & Wesson comes during a gunfight, a pretty random gunfight that Culp engages in. But these two guns are Culp's are pretty unique for Hollywood Westerns. But it doesn't stop there. Now, Hannie Caulder starts off carrying her husband's cut-down model 1892 Winchester carbine. And that's fine. After Culp's character comes along, Thomas Price, she knocks him out with that rifle, and then she takes his new model number 3 and tries to learn how to shoot it. And she's not doing that well. Culp takes her under his wing, and he brings her to a gunsmith in Mexico who used to work for the Confederacy. And he has this gunsmith build her a custom gun from scratch. Now, that's what the plot says. In point of fact, the gun the gunsmith builds, right, technically builds, is actually a British production gun from the 1850s. What it is a first model Trantor revolver. The first model didn't last long for a variety of reasons, but I believe that the armorers picked it, or the producers picked it, because it really is a unique-looking weapon. I mean, it's a typical British-looking gun, but it's got a double trigger. And pulling one of the triggers cocks the hammer, and pulling the other trigger fires it. And one trigger is actually located below the trigger guard. That's the hammer cocking one. Excuse me. One trigger is actually located below the trigger guard. That's the hammer cocking one. So, if you use two fingers and pull both triggers at the same time, you're basically shooting double action. Now, after the first model, Trantor went with the Beaumont Adams design, and they made a true single-action, double-action revolver instead of this funky double trigger thing. But Hannie Caulder's gun is a first model, and it really is different looking, and she uses it during the movie to excellent effect. So those are the two main characters of the movie. This brings us now to one ancillary character. Since we're talking about good guys, I'm going to start off with him. And he's called the Preacher. And he pops up 3 times in this movie for really no good reason. And I won't spoil the movie by telling you how he pops up the 3rd time. But he's armed with 7.5-inch Colt single-action Army revolvers. Pretty typical stuff, which he uses to great effect. So that's the end of the good guys. That brings us to the bad guys. And those are the Clemens brothers. And like I said, they kind of make the show. And for the most part, their armament is fairly standard. So we'll start off with Frank Clemens, the middle brother, and he's played by Jack Elam, who is always excellent and fun to watch. And he is armed with a pretty typical Colt. It's a 5.5-inch barrel peacemaker. And it's, the gun that you'll see in just about every Hollywood movie. The difference with Elam's, and because this was a British movie filmed in Spain, I think, they didn't have all the Hollywood guns. That's why you're seeing some of these British guns. All the Hollywood guns that, let's say, Stembridge would usually provide. So Elam's 6-gun is actually a Uberti copy of a Colt single-action revolver. And you can tell by the brass grip frames, because at that point in time, Uberti was putting brass grip frames on their single actions, and they were using the same grip frames that they were putting on their 1851 Navies. And eventually, of course, they got smart, and I'm sure because people were asking for it, and made steel grip frames that we see today on most Uberti single action clones. But back in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, they were, for the most part, brass grip frames. Elam wears his Peacemaker clone in a Anderson walk-and-draw rig. And these were fast draw rigs that became very popular in the 1960s. Clint Eastwood wore one most famously in his Sergio Leone trilogy. And he also wore them in a lot of his early American movies and late episodes, at least, of Rawhide. And these were the #1 favorite holsters of fast draw competitors during the 1960s. So Elam probably picked his up then. And he had it in this 1971 movie. They're very cool holsters, even if they're not historically accurate. Rufus, the youngest brother, was played by Strother Martin. And Strother Martin is just a fantastic character actor, and he does a great job in this movie. Provides a lot of the comic relief as well. He also wears a 5.5-inch barreled Uberti Colt clone. But for most of the movie, he relies much more on a double-barreled Colt Model 1878 side hammer shotgun. And you'll see that crop up in his hands in most scenes. Now, Emmett, the oldest of the Clement brothers, played by Ernest Borgnine, and Ernest just plays an excellent part in this. And he's armed, unlike his brothers, with an original Model 1875 Remington Army revolver. And this gun, of course, has a 7.5-inch barrel. And you can tell it's an original and not an Italian reproduction because it has no crossbolt to remove the cylinder pin. It has the original spring catch at the very end of the cylinder pin. So they went with an original here, a very classy looking gun, and Ernest Borgnine plays a great part with it. And that's it. Those are the guns used in the movie Hannie Caulder. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, you know what to do. Give it a thumbs up. Right, subscribe, like, share. Make a comment. I like comments. I read them all. And they do help with the algorithm, surprisingly enough. So feel free tell me what you thought. Most of you are not shy, I know that. And until next time, bye.